Surrounded by enemies, the alien princess made a choice that shook empires. The sky over the imperial capital of Zythera was no longer the serene violet that it had been just a few hours before. The clouds had darkened, tinged with streaks of fire and the metallic glint of ships. From the royal palace, perched on the tallest plateau in the city, Princess Lysara watched through the wide, transparent shields that lined the observation hall. The enemy fleets were closing in, thousands of vessels moving with terrifying precision, surrounding the planet from all directions. For centuries, the Zythurian Empire had dominated the nearby star systems, ruling through a combination of might, strategy, and fear. And now, centuries of confidence were being tested in ways the Empire had never imagined. Lysara's heart did not tremble, though. Her hands rested lightly on the edge of the observation platform, and her eyes were steady as they followed the slow, inevitable movement of the enemy ships. Unlike the rest of the court, who whispered and fretted behind her, she saw clearly. Flight was an option. It had always been an option for royalty. Evacuate, regroup, and leave the soldiers, and the people to fend for themselves while the heir of the empire survived to one day reclaim power. Many would have chosen it. Her advisors had already prepared the evacuation plans, but Lysara did not. Not yet. Her mind was already racing through possibilities that others dared not even consider. "You should go," said High Admiral Vyark, stepping forward. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of someone accustomed to authority and battles beyond the stars. "The fleets are too large. There is no hope for holding them back. Your life is more important than the empire itself." Lysara turned to face him. The light from the approaching ships reflected off her violet eyes, giving her an almost ethereal glow. "My life," she said softly, "is tied to the empire only as long as it serves the people. If I leave now, Zythera falls, and I will not abandon it." Vyark studied her, his face hard. "And what of the fleets outside? They are legion. We cannot outfight them. Even the strongest of Zythurian fleets will be torn apart." She allowed a faint smile. "Strength is not always measured in numbers, Admiral. Sometimes it is measured in choices." The hall grew quiet, the murmurs of the advisors fading. Lysara's words were not empty promises. She had already made her choice. The enemy had underestimated the one thing the Zythurians always relied upon: their arrogance. They had assumed the princess would flee. They had assumed the Empire's divisions would make her hesitate. They had assumed, above all, that there were no surprises left in the galaxy. But Lysara had spent months studying old treaties, secret archives, and the forbidden histories of the Empire. Buried deep in the records was mention of a species that had long been ignored by Zythurians, humans. The old texts called them weak, fragile, and unimportant, a species so young and small that they were not even worthy of treaties. But one obscure passage suggested a strategic possibility, a species capable of endurance, creativity, and unpredictability. She had already made her decision. She would call upon humanity. Vyark's eyes narrowed. "Humans," he said, incredulous. "The primitive species from Sector 12. They are barely a galactic footnote. You cannot." "They will act where Zythurians would hesitate," Lysara interrupted, her voice firm. "We are surrounded. Our defenses will fail. The humans, they may not be heroes, but they are survivors. And sometimes survival is enough to change the course of a war." The Admiral said nothing further. Lysara turned back to the observation hall, her gaze sweeping over the fleet approaching the capital. Even with her sharp eyes, she could not take in the full scope. The ships moved like dark stars, vast in number, blotting out the light of Zythera's moons. She could see the glint of weapons, the glowing shields that were almost impenetrable, and the massed formations that had crushed worlds in weeks. Yet she did not tremble. In that moment, Lysara felt the weight of centuries of expectation upon her shoulders. She had been trained since birth to rule, to negotiate, to command. But never had she been tested in such a way. The Empire's fate rested on one decision, one choice. One call to a species that the galaxy had laughed at. The call was simple, a message transmitted through a secure, forgotten channel that only humans might recognize. No Zythurian fleet had ever tried to contact Earth. No Zythurian official had expected humans to be relevant in the slightest, but Lysara knew the rules of survival were different for them. They had endured wars among themselves, natural disasters, and countless near extinctions. They had adapted, survived, and risen in ways that no other species in the galaxy had managed. As the transmission left her control console, she leaned forward, placing both hands on the edge. The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the enemy fleet continued its slow, deliberate advance. Lysara closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of the countless lives that depended on her decision. Soldiers, civilians, advisors, all looked to her, even if they did not yet understand. Minutes passed. Outside, the enemy did not slow. Inside, the tension was almost unbearable. And then, from the far reaches of space came the faint, almost imperceptible blip, a response. The humans were coming. It was not an army of perfectly disciplined ships, as Zythurians might have expected. There were no enormous fleets, no massive formations. Instead, the first human ships appeared as small, agile vessels, unevenly armed but moving with unmistakable confidence. Even from the observation hall, Lysara could see the difference in their movement. They did not fear the enemy. They did not hesitate. They adapted. Every turn, every maneuver seemed designed not just to survive but to disrupt. She allowed herself a small smile. The choice had been the right one. "Prepare the defenses," she said to Vyark, though her tone carried no urgency, only resolve. "We will fight, but we will not fight alone. The humans will do what we cannot, and together, perhaps, we can turn this siege into something else entirely." Vyark's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Very well, Princess. We will follow your command." As the hours stretched, Zythura's people watched the skies in awe and fear. Messages from neighboring sectors reported the same miraculous thing. Humans had arrived. Pilots and soldiers who had once been written off as insignificant were now engaging the enemy in daring raids, exploiting weaknesses that no Zythurian strategist had noticed. The alien fleets were unprepared for this style of fighting, chaotic, unexpected, and relentless. In the royal palace, Lysara moved from one observation window to another, her mind calculating and recalculating every possible scenario. She knew the humans were not a guarantee of victory. They were, in her estimation, the spark that could ignite a turning point. She also knew that the enemy would adjust, adapt, and retaliate fiercely. But she had faith in the ingenuity of a species that had survived against impossible odds. The first clash was a sign. Small human ships darted through enemy formations, launching precise attacks and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. Entire squadrons of the alien fleet were thrown into confusion. Lysara watched as the enemy admirals barked orders that went unheeded, their centuries of strategy unraveling in the face of something they had dismissed as insignificant. She realized, in that moment, that the Zythurian Empire's arrogance had been its greatest weakness. The enemy had assumed that fear alone would secure victory, that their overwhelming numbers and firepower would crush all resistance. But fear did not work on humans. Fear did not work on Lysara. And that was the first lesson of the battle to come. Survival was never about numbers alone. It was about courage, ingenuity, and the will to make impossible choices. Hours passed, and the human attacks continued. Even as some ships were destroyed, others took their place, relentless and unyielding. The enemy fleet began to falter, its cohesion breaking under the unpredictable assault. Lysara felt a rare sense of hope, but it was tempered with the knowledge that the real test had yet to come. The battle was only beginning. In the quiet moments between attacks, Lysara reflected on the path that had brought her here. From childhood, she had been taught that ruling meant following rules, keeping the peace, and preserving power. But now she understood that true leadership was about choices, about stepping into the unknown when everyone expected you to step back. She had chosen not to flee. She had chosen to call upon the humans. And in doing so, she had begun a war that would not just defend her empire but challenge the very assumptions of the galaxy itself. Night fell over the imperial capital, though it was hard to tell with the constant flashes of distant battles lighting the sky. Lysara remained in the observation hall, her eyes fixed on the horizon, watching both the approaching enemy and the humans who had answered her call. In that moment, she understood something fundamental. Hope was not a luxury, it was a strategy, and sometimes hope could be the most powerful weapon of all. As she stood there, the first signs of a larger battle began to take shape. The humans were coordinating, moving in patterns that no Zythurian tactical manual could predict. Enemy ships were being pushed back, forced to change formations and retreat in unexpected directions. Lysara felt a surge of pride, not in herself, but in the courage of the species she had summoned. The night was far from over, and the war was far from decided. But for the first time since the siege began, Lysara felt that the scales might tip in favor of her empire. Not because of overwhelming firepower, not because of centuries of strategy, but because of a choice. A single choice that had defied expectation and brought the unexpected into play. And somewhere far across the galaxy, humans were answering that call, unafraid, relentless, and ready to prove that survival was not just about strength, but about heart, ingenuity, and the will to fight against all odds. The first light of Zythura's twin suns barely broke through the smoke and chaos of the ongoing siege, when the humans made their move in earnest. Lysara stood in the observation hall of the royal palace, her eyes tracking every flicker of movement among the enemy fleets. What the enemy did not understand, and what many in her court still struggled to accept, was that the humans did not fight like the Zythurians or other alien species. They did not rely on overwhelming force, perfect formation, or fear to win battles. Instead, they adapted, improvised, and struck at the enemy in ways no one expected. The human ships were smaller than most of the vessels in the galaxy, yet their speed and agility were astonishing. They darted between larger ships, weaving through laser fire and shield barriers with uncanny timing. Where the Zythurian fleet had been trained to see threats in strict patterns and formations, the humans created chaos that was almost impossible to predict. For every human vessel destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. Lysara could see the difference immediately. The humans were not afraid, not even of ships 10 times larger than their own. She watched as the first wave of human fighters approached the leading edge of the enemy fleet. The alien admirals had assumed that the humans would hesitate, would recognize their inferior position, and either retreat or surrender. Instead, they charged forward. Laser beams and missiles rained down on the enemy in carefully calculated bursts, each human ship exploiting a weakness in the enemy shields. Entire squadrons of the enemy were forced to split, leaving gaps that the humans continued to press. The Zythurians in the observation hall could hardly believe their eyes. Fleet formations that had stood unchallenged for decades were being broken apart in hours. Admiral Vyerk moved closer to Lysara, his eyes narrowed. "They are not following conventional tactics," he muttered almost to himself. "They are too unpredictable. This is remarkable," Lysara nodded. "That is why they survive," she replied. "This is not about the strongest fleet or the largest guns. It is about ingenuity, courage, and the willingness to take risks that no one else will. Humans survive because they adapt, Admiral, and now we must do the same." Outside, the enemy fleet began to react, launching massive volleys aimed at the humans. Yet instead of retreating, The human ships shifted in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. They used the debris of destroyed vessels as cover, they drew the enemy into traps, and they struck at critical points that no alien strategist had noticed. Slowly but unmistakably, the tide of battle was shifting. The enemy was faltering. In the palace, Lysara's advisors whispered nervously. Many of them had been trained to follow rigid strategies, to rely on discipline and control. The chaos the humans brought was difficult for them to understand, and even more difficult to trust. Some suggested withdrawal, or at least minimizing engagement until the humans had proven themselves further. But Lysara knew better. The humans had already proven themselves by simply refusing to bow to fear. Hours passed, and the battle grew fiercer. Explosions lit the sky, casting flickering shadows across the city below. Lysara's eyes did not leave the observation panels. She studied the movement of every human vessel, noting the precision in their apparent chaos. They were not reckless. Every action had purpose. The humans had no illusions of immortality, yet they pressed forward relentlessly. A communication came through from one of the human leaders. It was short and simple. "We understand the situation. We fight with you." Lysara allowed herself a small smile. That single message carried more weight than an entire fleet of diplomats. It spoke of commitment, of understanding, and of a shared purpose. These humans were not just soldiers. They were a species that had learned to survive against impossible odds. And now, their survival instincts were being used to defend Zythera itself. As the day wore on, the humans continued their assault, pushing deeper into the enemy fleet. The alien forces had expected to crush Zythera quickly, to break the princess and force a surrender. Instead, they were being pulled apart by a strategy they could not anticipate. Human ships struck at the enemy's supply lines, cutting off reinforcements. They disabled communication arrays and left enemy vessels stranded in confusion. Each maneuver was precise, yet seemed entirely spontaneous. Lysara watched with growing admiration. Even in the midst of chaos, she could see the discipline hidden beneath the unpredictability. These humans had survived countless challenges on their own world, and now they were proving that they could change the course of galactic war. By evening, the first clear sign of human success was visible. Enemy ships that had advanced aggressively were now retreating in disarray. Their formations were broken, their commanders struggling to regain control. Even the most confident Zytherian generals admitted, quietly, that the humans were turning the battle. For the first time, Lysara felt hope surge through her. The empire she had been sworn to protect might yet survive, not because of Zytherian power, but because of an unexpected ally who had defied every expectation. The princess moved away from the observation panels, walking slowly through the hall. Soldiers and courtiers alike glanced at her, some with awe, others with disbelief. Her presence brought focus, her calm confidence a steadying force in a room full of tension. She had not simply called the humans for assistance. She had made a choice that demanded courage, a choice that put faith in the unlikely and the underestimated. And that choice was already proving itself. Hours passed into night. Even as the battle continued in space, the palace remained a place of calculated calm. Lysara met with Admiral Vyark and the other commanders, reviewing the reports of the human strikes. They had disrupted key enemy supply routes, destroyed advanced weapons platforms, and forced the enemy into reactive positions. Every report was a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and sheer willpower. "It is unlike anything I have ever seen," Vyark admitted. "They are not just fighting, they are thinking in ways that are impossible to predict. This is not mere luck or skill, this is something else." Lysara nodded. "It is survival, Admiral. They have faced extinction and chaos before. That experience has taught them to act decisively, even when the odds are impossible. That is what we need. That is what the Empire needs." The human attacks continued through the night. Alien fleets tried to reorganize, to establish new formations, but each attempt was met with a counterattack that disrupted them. Lysara watched the movements like a master strategist, understanding that this was only the beginning. The humans had the ability to turn the tide of battle, but they could not fight alone. Coordination with Zythurian forces was necessary, and Lysara had already begun issuing precise commands to combine human adaptability with Zythurian firepower. In one daring maneuver, a group of human fighters led an assault deep into the heart of the enemy formation. Their goal was not to destroy everything, but to create confusion, breaking the chain of command and leaving the enemy vulnerable. Even when heavily outnumbered, the humans did not falter. One by one, they struck at key targets, then withdrew before retaliation could be organized. Each action was followed by immediate analysis and adjustment, demonstrating a level of tactical intelligence that far surpassed what the enemy expected from a primitive species. Lysara felt a surge of pride. This was more than victory in a single battle. It was proof that the galaxy had underestimated not just humanity, but the potential of those who refused to be bound by fear or assumption. The humans were not perfect. They lost ships and they made mistakes. But each loss was a lesson, each mistake a chance to adapt, and the enemy had no answer for this style of fighting. By the early hours of the next morning, the first major enemy retreat began. Alien admirals had lost control, and their once feared fleet was scattering. The humans pressed the advantage, cutting off retreat paths and forcing the enemy into even greater confusion. Lysara watched, unmoving, her mind calculating the next steps. The humans had bought the Empire time, but the war was far from over. She knew that further battles would be even more dangerous, and that the enemy would not make the same mistakes twice. Yet in that moment, she allowed herself a rare sense of relief. Zythura had survived the first wave, not because of Zythurian might alone, but because of a choice to trust the unlikely, to act decisively, and to believe in the unexpected. Humanity had proven its worth, and Lysara knew that the bond formed in the heat of battle would shape the future of the Empire. As dawn broke fully, casting light on the battered but still standing capital, Lysara returned to the observation hall. The humans were regrouping, preparing for the next strike. Their movements were methodical, yet unpredictable, a combination that no enemy could anticipate. She felt a sense of awe at their resilience. This species, dismissed for centuries as weak and inconsequential, was now the difference between survival and annihilation for her people. The princess understood something fundamental in that moment. Power in the galaxy was no longer determined solely by numbers or tradition. It was determined by the courage to make bold decisions, by the willingness to act when others hesitated, and by the ingenuity to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. She had made a choice, and the humans had responded with everything they had. Together, they had changed the course of the battle. Lysara allowed herself one final glance at the horizon. The enemy fleet was in disarray, but far from defeated. The humans would continue to fight, and so would the Zythurians, side by side. The princess knew the challenges ahead would be greater, that the war was far from over, and that the Empire's survival still hung by a thread. But for the first time since the siege began, she felt hope, not blind hope, but the kind born of courage, trust, and action. In the days to come, this alliance would be tested. The enemy would learn, adapt, and strike back with even greater ferocity. But Lysara also knew that the humans had already taught the galaxy an important lesson. Survival depended not on fear, dominance, or overwhelming numbers, but on intelligence, courage, and the willingness to act decisively when the outcome was uncertain. And as the twin sons of Zythura rose fully into the sky, Lysara stood at the observation hall once more, her eyes fixed on the horizon, knowing that the next chapter of this war had begun. and that humanity, once dismissed as insignificant, had already begun to reshape the fate of an empire. The battle for Zythera had entered its third day, and the sky above the imperial capital was no longer just a field of fire and smoke. It had become a theater of war, alive with movement, sound, and the shimmer of countless weapons. Princess Lysara stood in the observation hall, eyes fixed on the shifting fleets beyond the shields. The humans, small and unassuming from a distance, moved with a precision and courage that seemed almost impossible. Where the enemy had relied on sheer force and fear, the humans relied on creativity, adaptability, and an understanding of the battlefield that went far beyond their numbers. Reports arrived almost constantly, detailing skirmishes, attacks, and strategic maneuvers. Entire squadrons of enemy ships had been diverted or destroyed by humans, often using tactics that no Zytherian commander had ever imagined. Lysara studied each report carefully, noting patterns in the human movements. They did not operate like soldiers trained to follow orders blindly. They acted like a single organism, coordinated yet unpredictable, capable of changing course in the middle of an attack and turning setbacks into advantages. Admiral Vyerk, standing beside her, shook his head in disbelief. "I have studied every battle manual, every strategy from the history of this empire, and yet these humans, these insignificant creatures, are doing what we could not. They are changing the battlefield itself." Lysara nodded. "They survive because they do not follow the rules that others impose. They improvise. They take risks we would never consider. That is what makes them dangerous and valuable." The humans' attacks had done more than disrupt enemy formations. They had forced the alien fleet into a defensive posture. The enemy, used to victory through intimidation and overwhelming force, was now hesitant, reacting to human movements instead of dictating the battle. Every time the enemy tried to advance, human ships found ways to counter, drawing the attackers into traps, disabling weapon systems, and forcing retreat. By mid-morning, the first major breakthrough occurred. A squadron of human ships had identified a critical weakness in the enemy fleet, a communication array that coordinated the movement of hundreds of ships. Without it, the enemy could not organize its fleets effectively. Human pilots attacked with incredible precision, dodging enemy fire while disabling the array. Within minutes, chaos spread across the enemy command structure. Ships that had once moved as one were now scattered, some retreating, others colliding in confusion. Lysara allowed herself a small smile. The humans were proving that victory was possible, not because of superior numbers or firepower, but because of intelligence, courage, and a willingness to act decisively. The Empire's soldiers, inspired by the humans' example, began to fight with renewed vigor. Zytherian ships, once hesitant and cautious, now joined the humans in coordinated strikes. The combination of human adaptability and Zytherian firepower began to push the enemy back. But Lysara knew that this victory was fragile. The enemy would not allow their losses to continue without retaliation. She needed to make a bold choice, one that could either secure the Empire's survival or lead to its destruction. The humans had bought time, disrupted enemy plans, and forced retreat. Now it was time for the Zytherians to act decisively, with humans at their side. She summoned her senior commanders to the strategy room. "We cannot simply defend," she said, her voice calm but firm. "The humans have shown us the path. We must strike at the heart of the enemy fleet, where they are weakest, and we must do it together. Delay will only cost us more ships and more lives." The commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Attacking the heart of the enemy fleet was dangerous, almost suicidal, but Lysara's confidence was unshakable. "We have allies who do not fear risk," she continued. "We have humans who see possibilities where others see obstacles. We will combine their ingenuity with our strength, and we will take the fight to them." The plan was bold, almost reckless. Zythurian ships would provide the main assault, drawing the enemy's attention and firepower, while human pilots infiltrated the flanks, striking at critical systems, disabling weapons, and creating openings for the main fleet to exploit. Timing would be everything, and communication would be key. Any mistake could lead to disaster. As the fleets moved into position, Lysara returned to the observation hall. She watched as human ships flitted among the Zythurian vessels, their movements precise yet fluid. For the humans, this was not just a battle. It was a test of their ingenuity, their courage, and their will to survive. Lysara felt a deep respect for them. They were not like any other species she had encountered. They were unpredictable, daring, and unafraid of impossible odds. The assault began at dawn. The Zythurian fleet moved forward, weapons blazing, drawing the enemy's attention. Enemy ships focused their fire on the largest vessels, believing that destroying them would break the morale of the defenders. Meanwhile, human pilots darted through the chaos, targeting weak points, disabling engines, and creating confusion. The enemy struggled to respond. Every attempt to reorganize was met with unexpected attacks, forcing them to constantly adapt. Lysara watched as the humans executed maneuvers that no Zythurian manual had ever described. Small teams of ships created diversions, lured enemy squadrons away, and then struck from unexpected angles. They used debris fields, destroyed vessels, and even the planet's atmosphere as cover. Their attacks were precise, effective, and relentless. Within hours, the enemy fleet began to falter. Command structures broke down, ships collided or retreated in confusion, and morale plummeted. For the first time, Lysara saw the possibility of not just defending Zythra, but achieving a decisive victory. But she also knew that the battle was far from over. The enemy would not allow themselves to be defeated without a final, desperate strike. As the day progressed, the humans and Zythurians continued their coordinated assault. Lysara personally oversaw critical maneuvers, issuing commands that integrated human adaptability with Zythurian firepower. The results were extraordinary. Enemy ships that had seemed invincible fell, one by one. Supply lines were severed, reinforcements blocked, and key leaders neutralized. The battlefield was no longer controlled by the enemy. It was controlled by those who had the courage to act decisively. In the midst of the battle, Lysara made another bold choice. She decided to leave the relative safety of the palace and join the front lines personally. Clad in a streamlined combat suit and accompanied by a small contingent of elite Zythurian pilots, she entered her personal assault vessel. The humans acknowledged her presence with respect, but without fear. They were used to working with those who led by action rather than command. Her arrival on the battlefield was a turning point. The enemy, already disoriented by human tactics, now faced a leader who fought alongside them. Lysara directed assaults, exploited weaknesses, and coordinated with the humans in real time. Her presence inspired the Zythurian fleet, transforming fear into determination. Soldiers who had hesitated now pressed forward, following the example set by their princess and the humans. The battle continued for hours, each moment a test of strategy, courage, and endurance. Enemy forces launched desperate counterattacks, but the humans anticipated them, using feints and calculated risks to maintain the advantage. Lysara coordinated the final assault, focusing on the enemy flagship. Taking out the command ship would cripple the enemy fleet entirely, and she knew the humans could execute maneuvers that no Zythurian squadron alone could manage. The assault on the flagship was daring. Human ships weaved through enemy defenses, drawing fire while Zythurian ships targeted critical systems. Lysara led the final strike personally, guiding her vessel through a hail of lasers and missiles. Every move was calculated, every risk taken with precision. Finally, the flagship's shields failed, and a coordinated strike destroyed its command core. The enemy fleet erupted into chaos. Without leadership, coordination collapsed. Ships retreated, formations broke apart, and morale shattered. The humans and Zythurians pressed their advantage, pushing the enemy out of the system entirely. Zythra, though battered, remained standing. The enemy had been defeated, not by overwhelming force alone, but by courage, strategy, and the willingness to act decisively against impossible odds. As the last enemy ships fled, Lysara allowed herself a moment to breathe. The cost had been high. Many human and Zythurian ships had been lost, but the Empire had survived. More importantly, a new respect had been forged between humans and Zythurians. Lysara knew that this alliance, born out of necessity, had proven the value of trust, ingenuity, and courage. Back in the palace, she addressed her people and her commanders. Today, we have survived because we dared to act where others hesitated. We have survived because we trusted the unlikely, because we recognized the value of courage in all its forms. The humans have shown us that survival is not just about strength, numbers, or tradition. It is about intelligence, adaptability, and the will to act decisively. Her words were met with a mixture of awe, relief, and admiration. The humans, though modest in their response, understood the significance of what had been accomplished. Together, they had changed the course of the battle. Together, they had proven that survival required not only might but also vision and courage. As night fell, the skies above Zythra were quiet for the first time in days. The city bore the scars of the battle, but it stood. The humans had earned the respect of an empire that had long underestimated them, and Lysara had cemented her place as a leader who could make impossible choices and inspire others to follow. She knew the war was far from over. The enemy would regroup, other powers would notice the humans' capabilities, and new challenges would arise. But for now, the princess allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. She had chosen to act decisively, to trust in the courage and ingenuity of a species long dismissed, and in doing so, she had turned the tide of war. The Empire had survived, and the galaxy had witnessed something extraordinary. The strength of the underestimated, the power of ingenuity, and the unyielding will to survive. And somewhere among the human pilots, a quiet determination grew. They had not fought for glory, not for conquest, but for survival, for an alliance forged in trust and necessity. They had proven themselves, and in doing so, they had changed the galaxy's understanding of what it meant to fight, to endure, and to win against impossible odds. The battle for Zythra had ended, but the sky above the imperial capital was still filled with smoke and the remnants of war. Fires burned across the city, and the distant sounds of collapsing enemy ships echoed through the valleys and mountains. Princess Lysara stood once again in the observation hall of the palace, her eyes scanning the horizon. The enemy fleet had retreated, broken and disorganized, but the princess knew that victory in a single battle did not mean the war was over. The galaxy had taken notice, and every empire, every faction, and every fleet would now assess the humans, not as insignificant observers, but as forces to be reckoned with. Admiral Vyark approached, his expression a mixture of relief and awe. The humans, they have exceeded every expectation. I do not think even we could have planned such an outcome, he said. Lysara nodded. They act differently than any other species in the galaxy. They do not follow conventional rules or fear. They do not retreat when overwhelmed, and they do not falter when the odds seem impossible. That is why they succeeded where others might have failed. Vyark hesitated. And yet, Princess, this will change everything. The galaxy will never see humans the same way again. Empires that once ignored them will now recognize their potential, and others may try to challenge them, or us, because of this alliance. Lysara's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. That is true, but we cannot be afraid of change. We cannot cling to old rules simply because they are familiar. We have survived because we acted decisively, and we have survived because we trusted those who were underestimated. Humanity has proven its worth, and the galaxy must now adjust its assumptions. The humans had remained quiet observers of the aftermath, their ships hovering near the capital. They did not boast, they did not demand praise. They had come to fight and had done so with precision, courage, and intelligence. Lysara understood their modesty. It was part of what made them extraordinary. She called a meeting with the human leaders, the Zythurian commanders, and her closest advisors. "Your species has changed the course of history," she began, her voice calm yet carrying the weight of authority. "Not because of overwhelming power, but because of ingenuity, courage, and determination. You have saved Zythera and preserved the Empire in a way that no one thought possible. For that, we owe you a debt that cannot be measured in words alone." The human leaders responded with quiet nods. One of them, a captain named Renacales, spoke in her clear, measured voice. "We did what we must to survive. That is all we do. We fight when survival requires it, and we act when others hesitate. Today, Zythera survived, and we are glad to have contributed." Lysara smiled. "You have contributed far more than survival. You have shown that even the smallest and youngest of species can make a difference. The galaxy has underestimated you, and it will take time for others to understand what you are capable of. But I understand it now, and I will ensure that your actions are recognized." Vyark spoke again, concern in his eyes. "Princess, the victory is clear, but the Empire is still vulnerable. Other factions may see this as an opportunity to strike while we are weakened. Your choice to ally with humans may also provoke resentment from those who do not trust outsiders." Lysara's gaze was steady. "I am aware of the risks, but the choice was clear. I could have fled, preserved myself, and left the Empire to be destroyed. Or I could act, take a risk, and trust in the underestimated. I chose the latter. That is the leadership the Empire needs now. Humanity has proven itself, and now we must integrate their strength with ours to secure a lasting peace." The human captain nodded. "We will continue to support the Zythurian fleet as needed, but our priorities remain survival and cooperation. We will not take orders, nor will we impose ourselves. We will act where necessary, and we will act decisively." Lysara recognized the wisdom in that approach. Humans were not conquerors, they were survivors. They fought for life, for possibility, and for the alliances they deemed necessary. They had no desire to dominate, but their presence had already shifted the balance of power in the galaxy. Over the following days, the Empire began to rebuild. Zythurian engineers and human crews worked side by side to repair damaged ships, clear debris from the city, and restore communications. Soldiers shared strategies and lessons, learning from the humans' unpredictable approaches to warfare. Lysara moved through the capital, visiting hospitals, command centers, and defense posts. She spoke to soldiers and civilians alike, praising their courage and determination. In her private chambers, she reflected on the choices that had brought her here. The decision to contact humanity had been risky, unprecedented, even forbidden by imperial protocol. Yet it had been the only choice that could have preserved her people. By acting decisively, she had saved the Empire, formed a new alliance, and reshaped the way the galaxy would view both Zythurians and humans. Even as the immediate threat faded, political challenges emerged. Neighboring empires, previously indifferent to the conflict, now recognized the humans as a significant force. Some sought alliances, others threatened war, and many debated how to respond to the unexpected demonstration of human ingenuity. Lysara knew that diplomacy would be critical. The galaxy had witnessed what humans could do, and she needed to ensure that their power would be respected, not exploited. She summoned her advisors for a council meeting. "We have survived, but the galaxy is watching," she said. "Humans have shown that strength is not always measured in fleets or weapons, but in courage, adaptability, and determination. We must honor that strength while ensuring that Zythera remains secure. Our next steps will shape the future of the Empire and the galaxy itself. The Council debated fiercely. Some feared that humans might overreach, that their influence could destabilize existing power structures. Others recognized that the alliance had proven invaluable and that cooperation with humans could be the key to long-term stability. Lysara listened carefully, weighing every argument. She understood that leadership required more than bravery in battle. It required vision, strategy, and the courage to make choices that others might fear. After hours of discussion, she made her decision. "We will formalize our alliance with humanity," she announced. "They have shown that survival depends not on numbers alone, but on courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to act when others hesitate. We will honor their contributions, integrate their knowledge with our own, and ensure that the galaxy understands that the underestimated are often the most powerful." The council fell silent, absorbing the weight of her words. Lysara continued, "We will also send envoys to neighboring empires, demonstrating our strength and the power of cooperation. The galaxy must see that Zythera has survived, and that humans are not to be ignored. Diplomacy will secure our place, and strategy will maintain our advantage, but courage will remain the foundation of our empire." In the following weeks, Zythera began to recover. The human alliance proved invaluable in training Zytherian crews, repairing ships, and fortifying defenses. Soldiers and civilians alike gained a new respect for the humans, marveling at their ingenuity, resilience, and unyielding spirit. Lysara personally oversaw the integration of human strategies into Zytherian tactics, ensuring that the lessons of the siege were not forgotten. The political landscape of the galaxy shifted as well. Empires that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant began to take notice. Some sought alliances, recognizing the value of cooperation with a species that had proven itself under fire. Others approached with caution, wary of the unpredictable nature of humans and the boldness of the Zytherian princess who had chosen to trust them. In every interaction, Lysara emphasized respect, fairness, and strategic thinking. She understood that true leadership required balance, strength tempered by wisdom, courage paired with foresight. Despite the challenges, Lysara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had made a choice that others would have feared, that others would have dismissed as impossible. By trusting the underestimated, she had saved her empire, forged a powerful alliance, and reshaped the galaxy's understanding of strength. Humanity had proven that survival, courage, and ingenuity could overcome even the most overwhelming odds. And in doing so, they had earned a place in the galaxy's future, a place of respect, partnership, and influence. As she stood once more in the observation hall, looking out over the capital, Lysara reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The siege, the battles, and the choices she had made had tested every lesson she had learned since childhood. Yet through it all, one truth had become clear. Leadership was not about preserving comfort or avoiding risk. It was about action, courage, and the willingness to make difficult decisions when everything is at stake. The humans, quiet and steady in their presence, had reinforced that lesson. They had fought not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival and cooperation. Their bravery had inspired her, strengthened her fleet, and proven that even the most underestimated species could change the course of history. Lysara knew that the Empire faced challenges ahead. There would be threats, political intrigue, and new wars. But the lessons of this conflict, the value of courage, the power of ingenuity, and the strength of the underestimated, would guide her and her people. Humanity had become an ally, a teacher, and a partner. Together, they had changed the galaxy, and together, they would face whatever came next. And as night fell over the imperial capital, the city lights reflected in the observation hall, Lysara allowed herself a rare moment of peace. She had made a choice, a bold and unprecedented choice, and it had reshaped the fate of an empire. The humans had answered not with arrogance but with courage. And in their response, she had seen a truth that would guide the galaxy for generations. Sometimes, the smallest and youngest of species could teach the greatest empires what it truly meant to survive and to thrive. The stars beyond Zythera were quiet, yet alive with possibility. Lysara knew that the galaxy had changed forever. The humans had proven their worth, the empire had survived, and a new era was beginning, one where courage, ingenuity, and bold choices would shape the destiny of all. The alien princess had made her choice, and it had shaken empires. Now, the galaxy would witness the consequences, and the underestimated would no longer be ignored. Surrounded by enemies, the alien princess made a choice that shook empires.